Hi. So for the month of March, I thought I would try something a little bit different and try to do kind of a recap of the books that I'm reading a little closer to when I actually finish them. I thought it'd be fresher in my mind and be a little more variety. So the first book that I read in March was Zombies, The Recent Dead. And this is a book of short stories. It's edited by Paula Garan. My stepmother and I share a love of zombie books, so she will often gift me ones when she's done, and likewise, I share ones with her as well. So I can't say that I've read a book of short stories, zombie books, recently, so this was fun. Mostly, I was interested in terms of certainly entertainment for the moment, but also getting some good authors that I could look up and add to my Goodreads list. And I did that. So I wanted to highlight a couple of the stories that I particularly liked from this anthology. The first one was by Tim Leben, Naming of Parts. And this is a story that's told from the standpoint of a small boy on he's I would guess in the UK, and it's the beginning of an outbreak. He lives with his parents um, in a small farming area or village, and when the outbreak happens, his family flees first by car and then on foot. Um, and it was good. It was, I looked up Tim Leben is the author of this short story. He looks like a really prolific writer. It looked like he has written a lot of like the Star Wars non-canon kind of alternate stories, as well as some sci-fi fantasy horror. So that was interesting. That was good. There was an excerpt that was not published in World War Z by Max Brooks, which was also good. Love Max Brooks. And this is a little more serious. It's the story of the rebuilding of a section of the Great Wall in China, and the protagonist is a female. So that was interesting. It was a really short one, but still really good. I mean, it's great. The next short story that I really enjoyed was called Dead Man's Land, and it's by David Wellington. It again has a female protagonist, which I liked, and it's set in a post-apocalyptic world in which sort of an outsider goes from big box store to big box store. The big box stores like Home Depot or Lowe's or Walmart's set up sort of their own communities, and then travel in between them. You need someone as sort of a guide, and this female protagonist is one of those guides, and she's leading the daughter of one of the heads to go marry another enclave to kind of unite the two. So that's a really interesting scenario. She's the protagonist is what you call a roadie, and she goes by the name Cher. So this one was really good, and I'm definitely going to be pursuing other novels by David Wellington. The next one that I liked was called Disarmed and Dangerous by Tim Wagoner. This one is told from the standpoint of a zombie who is in a sort of hellscape in a city called Necropolis. And my understanding is that there are other books that are set in the necropolis, so definitely going to be looking up those as well. The zombie in this scenario is not like a slow moving, it's a person with consciousness, who happens to be in a zombie body and also happens to be a detective, which is kind of a fun twist. Let's see. Another one that I thought was good was called Dead to the World, and it's by Gary McMahon. And it's kind of dark, which is kind of a funny thing to say for a book that is set in a zombie universe. But this particular story is a husband and wife. And the husband it's from his point of view. He's kind of been hardened by the life that they've been living. It's been 10 years since the apocalypse started, the zombie outbreak started. And it's kind of how he's coping with relationships as being completely shut down. And when he has left alone and then is sort of rescued by another survivor, how he reacts to that situation, which is negatively. So that one was an interesting one as well. And that's not all of kind of the ones that I found of interest in the story. That's just a taste of them. So I'd say this is a pretty good book and it's worth looking into. Change of pace. The next one that I read was Talking to Strangers, and it's a Malcolm Gladwell book. I really enjoy Malcolm Gladwell. I've heard a lot of hype about this book. That's his latest. I've heard him interviewed several times about it on Armchair Expert, I think by Tim Ferriss as well. I might be conflagrating that, but I've heard him talk several times about the book, and I was particularly interested in the ebook of this because in the ebook or the audio, I was particularly interested in the audio book version of this because I've heard him interviewed talking about it and how he uses excerpts of interviews, and it's sort of a different take on an audiobook. Whenever possible, he had the person he was talking about in the book included in it, which I thought was really interesting. But the book was available from my library, so I'm trying to be a little more budget conscious. So I thought I'd try to read it first and then see after reading it if I was worth pursuing the audiobook. The book was interesting. My takeaway from it primarily, what I felt like he was trying to say, and he used some really interesting examples to illustrate his points, was that first, we have trouble communicating with strangers because we have these preconceived notions of what emotions look like. If you've ever been around a kid in preschool or a kid in kindergarten, you've seen that they have sort of examples when they're teaching them emotions, like this is the expression that you have if you're happy, this is your expression you have if you're angry, this is the expression that you have if you're sad. We have internalized all of these like Hollywood ideas of those things, to the extent that when someone does not outwardly emote in sort of an exaggerated cartoon Hollywood way, grief or fear, remorse or whatever, we presume to know what that means. And kind of the point of the book is that is just an assumption. That is a creation that we've created or Hollywood has created. That's not necessarily the truth. You can't always tell someone's guilt or innocence, whether someone's lying or telling the truth, based on an expression that they have. It seems like it should be fairly intuitive, but the fact of the matter is our judicial system, judges, jury trials, the way police officers interact with people, a lot of that is based on those assumptions. And so the fallacy of that causes a lot of grief in a lot of people's life. And sort of the story that is bookending the book is the Sandra Bland case, where a police officer in Texas pulled over Sandra Bland. It really escalated what was a minor traffic stop, and Sandra Bland unfortunately was arrested as a result of that, and after 3 days in prison or in jail, ended up hanging herself, which is really, really tragic. So, and that was based on sort of misunderstandings between the two, miscommunication between the two. And you can argue who was right, who was wrong, but when it came down to it, it was strangers not understanding each other very well. And it's caused all kinds of problems. And these are really spoken at length about everything from the CIA allowing double agents inside their organization. Also, another thing is people default to truth. They just give people the benefit of the doubt and end up expecting that people are speaking the truth, which includes like Neville Chamberlain meeting Hitler and making assumptions and diplomatic policy around the person that Hitler presented themselves to be. And there's further examples of that as well. Some of the major sort of scandals of our time, including the Sandusky child abuse case, were presented in there as well. Also, the Amanda Knox trial, where American exchange student was convicted in a court of Italian public opinion and their judicial system based on her sort of strange behaviors, kind of pointing out that behaviors can also be cultural representations as well. It was also pointed out the assumptions that are made and how alcohol can further kind of confuse people and reactions, especially in cases of consent. So they talked about the Brock Turner case, and how that was actually one of the most interesting chapters to me. They talked about how alcohol, people think it just lowers inhibitions. It's really an agent of myopia, and the way that it affects your brain is that there's the scenarios of blackouts, but it's also eliminating sort of your long range view of things, and just how important it would be to reduce alcohol consumption in sexual assault cases. That it's huge. And as someone who has not been drinking, there's so many reasons that would be powerful and something to be passing on. I feel like it's a conversation that I should have with the kids in my life that I know are of an age where it would be fairly typical behavior for them to start drinking or be in situations of binge drinking. Another interesting part was about how our memories are impacted by experiences, by trauma, by like interrogation techniques of, I was talking about essentially extreme interrogation techniques, and actually how they have the potential to skew and actually destroy memories, alter the memories and the information that we're actually seeking to gain from people when we interrogate them. Next, it talked about coupling, which is a term of linking behaviors. Again, in the context of the Sandra Bland case, the technique that the police officer who pulled over Sandra Bland initially used was one where it had been used effectively in Kansas City to reduce violence, but it reduced violence when it was coupled with being used in areas of extreme crime, of really specific blocks, just a few specific streets or areas, side streets, that had extreme violence, whereas where it was used in Texas was not at all a high crime area. But they were still using the same technique of just essentially for almost any reason pulling people over on the off chance that the people would have drugs or guns or, you know. And so that was an example. They also talked about the case of Sylvia Plath, and how also another interesting point about how suicide rates dropped when the type of gas that they used, that Sylvia Plath used to kill herself, when they removed that type of gas and started using natural gas, how suicide rates dropped really extremely, and how that's kind of counter to what common thinking would be, where they use the example of the Golden Gate Bridge. Like, so many people have committed suicide, and I should have the stats offhand, but I don't. If I get them, I'll put them here. There has been such resistance in public opinion to spending the money needed to putting a safety net to prevent suicides on the Golden Gate Bridge, because kind of the court of public opinion was that if you removed that method of people killing themselves, then they would just find another. Whereas with this theory of coupling, people get fixated on a specific way of killing themselves. And when you remove that specific way that they fixated on, often they're much less likely to pursue that then, it's interesting. It's something worth thinking about. I would have been with the people who thought, well, if somebody wants to kill themselves, they'll find a way to do it. But actually, with coupling, that's not the case, as proven by the change in statistics when they removed the form of gas that they used that was lethal in homes. So overall, it was an interesting book. I thought that there would be more along the lines of learning how more effectively to talk to strangers. And I don't feel that that was the case. It was more, here are the things not to do. Don't presume that you know. So I guess maybe that is, in a way, a list of do's. Do be receptive to what people are telling you. Don't presume to know other people's emotions and who they are based on facial expressions. Don't presume the truth. I don't know. It's not my favorite of his books, but it was an interesting read nonetheless. So, at the beginning of the first segment, I told you that my big plan for March was to try to record my summation and review of the books a little closer to when I was reading them. And then at that point, we were pretty early in the pandemic that started in the month of March. Well, it started way ahead of that, but in the area I live in, southeastern Pennsylvania, we became more and more aware of the seriousness of that. We started, the governor of Pennsylvania started some measures sort of locking the state down, and a lot of my plans kind of went out the window with kind of the chaotic shift in priorities and anxiety and worry, and lots of things got moved around. Anyway, so here we are. I'll be upfront, it's April, and I am trying to finish out my commitment to myself for the month of March with my roundup. So I read a one fewer book than I usually do. I usually average around 6 books a month. This month of March, I only did 5. So let me run through the last 3 and I'll give you kind of my lingering opinions of them since I've had time to reflect on them. So the next book that I read was The Wives, and it's by Tarryn Fisher. And this is not a book that I necessarily would have picked up myself, but my book club, not me, chose this book. Though I did vote on it. Our book club sort of, whoever's month it is, will suggest several books, and then the whole group sort of votes on which one they'd like to read. So it is by popular opinion. So the premise of this book is that there's a woman named Thursday, and she's one of the wives in a polygamist marriage where she essentially shares her husband with 2 other women. So she generally only sees him a limited amount of time. And this book was interesting in that it had a lot of sort of twists and turns that maybe you weren't expecting. I can't say that I anticipated everything that came out of this book. And it was a really quick read. Like, it was suspenseful. And I would describe it as like a beach read if you're looking for something sort of chick lit. There are some questions in the back of this book, I guess, thought being that if someone was going to be reading it, there's a reader's guide with some questions. So just to tap a couple of these questions, and as always, I say, here be spoilers. I'll try not to give everything away, but if you haven't read the book and are looking to, and you're somebody who'd be disturbed, maybe fast forward. So Thursday has a complicated marital situation, one that differs from typical plural marriage. And I don't know what exactly they mean by typical plural marriage. Basically, the only typical I know about would be from shows like Big Love or Sister Wives. I'm assuming they mean like a situation where all 3 wives kind of cohabitate, are aware of each other, and share the housekeeping and child rearing and all that kind of stuff. Do you think you could ever share your spouse with 2 other partners this way? No. No, I do not. I'm not a good sharer. Next question. How tempted would you be to find out about the other spouses, even if you'd promise not to? I wouldn't promise not to. I would have to know. Would you break that promise? Absolutely. I would hope to never find myself in such circumstance, but yes, I would break that promise. What kinds of things does Thursday sacrifice in order to be with Seth? So Thursday is the female protagonist in the story, and Seth is the male protagonist, her husband, whom she shares. So Thursday, the protagonist, keeps her marriage to Seth, the true circumstances of it, a secret from essentially everyone she knows, her family. She ends up revealing it to one coworker, but she doesn't really have friends. And I think that is in part because of the circumstances that she finds herself in. Other questions that they had: how much sympathy did you have for Seth? None. Why? Because he's a polygamist. And I find it awfully convenient that it's not him being with multiple spouses. It's a non-feminist take on a polygamous situation. And it's very unfair. And even as information is revealed as the story goes on, that Thursday is a troubled person, I think he takes advantage of her vulnerabilities. And it asks, did your feelings change as the story developed? Not really. I mean, I guess I could understand more given the information that's revealed about Thursday. As much of a stretch and suspension of disbelief as it required to believe it. But no, I didn't really have sympathy for him. He kind of seemed like a philanderer all the way around, and not that anyone deserves um, the circumstance he ends up with at the end of the book. He's not a terribly sympathetic character. I think sort of the most interesting relationships in the book is one of the questions. I found the relationships to be somewhat flat. Sort of friendship sparks between the third wife and Thursday, who is portrayed as the second wife for most of the book. But it's not a relationship that's based on any sort of honesty or understanding. So I didn't find that to be a great depiction of female friendships. And the relationship between the first wife and Thursday also was very sort of flat. Yeah. I didn't love this book. It was a very easy read. Like, it was compelling. It was sort of like reality television-y. I didn't leave feeling very good about it. So if you're looking for sort of a trashy beach read, I could say that this would fit the bill. I don't know if it's a book that I would necessarily recommend a whole lot. The next book I read is an Armand Gamache book by Louise Penny, How the Light Gets In. And this book is interesting. It was satisfying in the sense that a lot of the sort of dramatic things that have been cliffhangers from previous books are wrapped up in this book. And it was good to see the reunion of Armand Gamache with the folks from Three Pines. You saw sort of a crescendo of, or a culmination of, his fight with Superintendent Francoeur. So a lot of good stuff gets picked up and resolved. And sort of questions that were left hanging about Armand. Is he losing his touch? Is he beaten by the situation? Were resolved. And again, I'm trying not to give everything away if you haven't caught up that far with the stories, but this is a good one. Usually all of these books are somewhere between a 3 and 4.5 stars for me. And this one I'd say is solidly in the 4 category. There was a lot of good resolution. And of course, there was also a mystery tied up in it as well that I wasn't able to put together immediately. The same beautiful language that you can expect when it comes to Louise Penny's books, and the reassurance of Armand Gamache, which was lovely in this time where the world seems very uncertain around us. It was nice to escape into that world again, where Armand is solid and lovely. So good, recommend this one, and of course the whole series. So since the world is in a somewhat apocalyptic scenario, I thought it would be great to read another zombie book. So I had another anthology that my stepmother had given me, and it was a nice departure. I have been struggling somewhat with my attention span this month, so being able to just kind of pick up and put down in little snippets, short stories, was nice. So this will give you some highlights from it. The first one, short story I really enjoyed, was called Danger Word by Stephen Barnes and Tananarive. I don't know. Look for the link in the profile. This is a story told from the standpoint of a youngish child who was rescued from his grandfather from a safe room in his parents' house close to the start of the zombie outbreak. His grandfather is a Vietnam vet and has managed to keep him safe to this point. And then his grandfather takes him for supplies to a trading post, and some not great stuff happens. So that one was really interesting. And I enjoyed it. I would recommend. Like the other zombie anthology that I read, these are great kind of as short ones to pick up on, but then also to get some good authors to look for additional books for. So the next one that I enjoyed was called Zombieville by Paula Stiles, and that takes place in Africa, I believe, and there are a couple of Peace Corps volunteers who are making a living cleaning out, burning out houses where the zombies have been. So that's another kind of interesting take on where you might be or how you might end up in an apocalypse. Next one I enjoyed was by David Wellington. It's called Good People. And the first zombie anthology that I read, Zombies, the Recent Dead, earlier this month, also had an excerpt from David Wellington, I believe. So this one is told from the standpoint of a female protagonist who was a former dancer from Vegas who is with a group of survivors with her young daughter who finds herself in a tough spot. Next one I really enjoyed was called The Crocodiles by Stephen Popkeith. And this one is in World War II, and it has Nazis developing the zombie plague as a way, as I guess a war weapon against their enemies. And this is kind of an alternative telling of something of a different outcome to World War II. Next, we have The Skullfaced City by David Barr Kirtley. And this is in a reality where there are two different types of zombies. There are sort of the slow, the not very bright, strictly food-driven zombie, and then there are the skull faces who are animate corpses. These skull faces have decided to separate themselves from the living and the zombies, and they remove the skin to just show their skulls, showing that they're sort of separating themselves from the vanity of humans. And this is one of the skull faces you find out has voluntarily made himself a zombie, and those type of zombies are those that died not by being eaten or bitten by another zombie. They died of some other cause unrelated to zombies, and then they come back being having intelligence. And this one made himself one in order to rescue his sister. So he manages to rescue and liberate her. That one was really interesting as well. Next, we have Everglades by Mira Grant. Next one I enjoyed was called Reluctance by Sherry Priest. And I think I've read some of Cherie or Sherry Priest before, some steampunk sort of ones. This one's kind of neat. It's in a future where some of the transportation is happening via dirigible. So very steampunk sort of mode of transportation. And one of the express route pilots is going jumps in between cities to deliver mail and packages. He heads to the next city only to find that it is under siege. Next, we have Thin Them Out by Kim Paffenroth, which is another author I think that I've read before, RJ7 and Julie 7. And this one is about an enclave where there's sort of a division or a mutiny happening inside of the enclave. Some people who think that they should leave and set off in a different direction, and others who want to stay put, and how that goes awry. And sort of set amongst this is also part of the story is told from the viewpoint of a zombie. And there's kind of a crossing between those two storylines in the book. The last one that I really enjoyed was The Days of Flaming Motorcycles by Catherine M. Valente. And this is the story told by a girl who's been observing the zombies. Her father is a zombie, and she discovers that the zombies are gathering kind of items of their old lives and almost building a cathedral or a temple of some sort to these items. She doesn't have a negative interaction with her father, the zombie. He's marked her in some way so that the other zombies leave her alone. And so that was kind of an interesting take. I do want to mention, just for kind of curiosity or gross out factors sake, there was probably the grossest story I've ever read in this one. It was called Zombie Gigolo by S.G. Brown. And apparently, based on the little kind of foreword or description, this happened to be written for sort of a gross out contest of some sort. The title, Zombie Gigolo, says it all. It's a zombie who has intercourse with other zombies in various stages of decay, and it was really disgusting. So if you're into that, I guess I am not. Another interesting one I read was called The Rape Worm by Charles Coleman Finley. It was well written, but I don't know, it was a little gross. Even just the name, Rape Worm. Yuck. Anyway, so this was a good distraction. My best friend told me that I probably should not be reading so many zombie books during this pandemic, but you know, you get into stuff. So this is a little bit of a departure from the previous wrap-ups that I've done. I don't think I'm going to put the Goodreads scores in here. I'm really just doing this for myself. So it's something that I can revisit later. If anyone does happen upon it and you've made it this far, congratulations. You must be as bored as I am in the pandemic. I hope you're well and you're safe. Until next month.